Our moderator, Christie Hefner, has long been involved in civic and political matters. She's presently serves, as I mentioned, as director on the board of the Center for American Progress Action, the leading progressive public policy think tank founded by John Podesta. She's on the Civic Advisory Committee of the Better Government Association and the Executive Committee of Independent Maps. I think many of us know she was chairman and CEO of Playboy Enterprises for 20 years. What many of us don't know is that means she is was the longest serving woman CEO of any New York Stock Exchange corporation. So. And she's commercially still very active as chairman of Hatch Beauty, a brand and product innovation company in the personal care space. Our first panelist, Cook County Board President Toni Preckwinkle, she's been a dedicated community leader for more than 2 decades. I think it's longer than 2 decades even. Since taking office in 2010, President Preckwinkle has rebuilt credibility of the county's government. She's solved over $1.4 billion in budget deficits and cut, for those of you who think we can't cut waste in spending in government, $465 million in expenditures at the county, so thank you for that, Toni. She's established the county's first performance management initiative to demand more accountability from county operations and employees. President Preckwinkle has developed a broad policy agenda focusing on critical public safety reforms, working to strengthen the county's healthcare systems, and increasing the capacity and capability of our economic development efforts. So welcome to President Preckwinkle. Our next panelist, Ethan Nadelmann, is the founder and executive director of the Drug Policy Alliance, the leading organization in the United States promoting alternatives to the war on drugs. Mr. Nadelmann and his colleagues have played pivotal roles in most of the major drug policy reform ballot initiatives in the U.S. on issues ranging from medical marijuana, marijuana legalization, to prison reform, drug treatment and reform of asset forfeiture laws. His organization has also reformed state and federal laws involving drug sentencing, access to sterile syringes to reduce HIV/AIDS, access to drug treatment, prevention of overdose facilities, and all aspects of marijuana policies. Ethan, we're delighted to have you here today. Thank you. And our final panelist, Jens Ludwig, is director of the University of Chicago Crime Lab. He's co-director of the University of Chicago Urban Education Lab, and he's the McCormick Foundation Professor of Social Service Administration, Law, and Public Policy at the University of Chicago. In 2008, Professor Ludwig helped found the Crime Lab to partner with policymakers in Chicago and around the country to carry out large-scale policy experiments to identify more effective and humane ways to help prevent crime and violence and to reduce social harms associated with the administration of criminal justice. Please welcome this distinguished panel and Christie Hefner. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael, and thanks to the club for choosing to address this timely and really critically important issue. I also want to thank up front each of the panelists. As you can tell from their backgrounds, these are not only people of accomplishment, they're people who are in demand to be many places, and that they have chosen to be here with us today speaks to the respect they have for the audience and how critically important they think the issue is. And I also want to thank all of you for taking the time to be here. Every day we pick up the paper or we listen to the news and there is another tragic shooting or murder that is splashed all over the front page, which creates a sense that we must be in chaos in our cities, which in turn might lead many of us to think that the best public policy that we could promote would be, frankly, to get more people off the streets and put more people in our prisons and our jails. What we're going to talk about here today is what actually do we know about what makes us safer and what is the right and smart criminal justice policies. By way of context, we in the United States have about 5% of the world's population, and almost 25% of our population is incarcerated. Michael mentioned The New Jim Crow, a book by Michelle Alexander that I'm sure many of you read or have heard Michelle interviewed. And that has done a lot to put out into the conversation this idea that we have wound up in a situation where mass incarceration is our norm. For the first time, we have a seated president who went to a federal prison and has spoken about mass incarceration. But I think more significantly than any one voice is that there is increasingly a bipartisan coalition forming around the idea that both the human cost and the financial cost of the policies that we have been pursuing under the rubric of the war on drugs and get tough on crime have left us in a position where we are no longer safer. In fact, crime is lower, and yet incarceration rates are higher. But at the same time, we have disproportionately harmed communities and communities of color. And that coalition is represented by people of faith, by libertarians, by social justice activists, and by social conservatives who look at the wasted money in the system that is the status quo. So what we want to do today is talk about what do we know is working in other states and other countries, what is actually happening here in Illinois, and what can all of us do that would actually allow Illinois and Chicago to be a leader in fair and effective criminal justice policies that are empirically based. So just a little bit of context. In fact, incarceration rates generally have been going down. They've been going down by about 7% over the last 5 years. But here in Illinois, they've gone up 7% in the last 5 years, which makes us the 8th largest increase in the country. 90% of the people who are in Cook County Jail are there because they are awaiting trial. In other words, they can't make bond. And of the people in jail, 70% are there because they're accused of nonviolent crimes. One of the things we want to look at today is what are our policies doing in terms of impact and disparity of impact in terms of communities of color. A lot of you may remember how stop and frisk was a very important issue in the mayoral election in New York recently, but in fact, based on the study that the ACLU of Illinois did, we actually had a higher percentage of stop and frisks going on per capita here. And in fact, in a 3-month period, just to give you a sense of the magnitude, 250,000 people were stopped and frisked. And you would say, well, but what kind of arrests came from that? Because that's the intent. The percentage of people who were arrested, none. 250,000 stops, no arrests. The percentage of people who were African Americans, 72. So we want to talk about what's happening here, and we have no better person to start us off than President Preckwinkle, because Toni has both talked about and taken action around this question of the impact on communities of color, over policing, and what we as a system can be doing. So Toni, if you could start us off by giving the audience a little bit more context about what is it like today, and where do you think we can start to try and move it towards?
Thank you, Christie, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm very grateful that the club has taken on this issue because I think it's a critical one. Let me begin with the statistic that Christie shared in her opening remarks. We have 5% of the world's population and 25% of the people in the world who are in jail or prison. 5% of the world's population and 25% of the people in the world who are in jail or prison. So we have tremendous incarceration and detention rates. And unless you think that Americans are more likely to be criminals than people elsewhere in the world, we're doing something terribly wrong. And I should point out that our detention and incarceration rates are different for white people than they are for African Americans and Latinos. If we detained and incarcerated white people at the same rate they did in Northern Europe, we'd be about at the same levels as every place else in the world. The reason we have such this tremendous disparity between the percentage of our world population and the percentage of the people in jail or prison in the world, that is 5% of the population and 25% of the people detained or in prison, is because we detain and incarcerate black and brown people at just extraordinary rates. Half the population of Cook County is black and brown, about 25% Latino, about 25% African American. But 86% of the people in our jail are black and brown. And that's a reflection of the over-policing of black and brown communities, to come back to Christie's point, the over-policing of black and brown communities. And I think that results, frankly, from racism. I usually say that our jail is at the intersection of racism and poverty. The people in our jail are poor black and brown people. And the jail population in Cook County is driven by the city of Chicago, which has half the population of the county, but 80% of the people in the jail are from the city of Chicago. So it's policing strategies in the city of Chicago that drive our jail population and contribute to the tremendous disproportionate minority contact in our criminal justice system. Now, we're not unusual in this in the country. This is a problem of considerable magnitude all across the nation. But we're here in Cook County, so I'm going to talk about that. Let me just say, I'm encouraged, although those statistics are pretty discouraging, I'm encouraged by the coalition that Christie alluded to that has been developing around criminal justice issues. The people on the right, and sometimes the far right, like the Koch brothers, and people on the left who have been arguing that these detention and incarceration rates are an abomination, are coming together around the cost of operating our criminal justice system. It costs us $143 a day to keep somebody in jail, more than $50,000 a year. I have a college-age daughter. I'm sure others of you in this room have college-age kids. You can send your kid to a pretty fine private institution for $50,000 a year. And that's what it costs us to keep people in jail. And as you heard, the overwhelming majority of the people who are awaiting trial for nonviolent offenses. It's drug offenses, it's prostitution and shoplifting, the things people do to get money for their drugs. It's not paying their child support. Those are the things for which people are detained in our jail pre-trial because they can't afford their bail, their bond. So we've focused in the 5 years that I've been in this office on trying to reform bond court because that's the port of entry into our criminal justice system. When I was elected in December of 2010, when I took office in December of 2010, we had 10,000 people on an average daily basis in our jail. It's now below 8,000, and we're working to drive that number down to 6,000. And I would point out that we have not seen a dramatic uptick in the number of people who don't show up for their hearings or their trial, or who are accused of a new offense as they await the disposition of the case that brought them into the criminal justice system. Still about 2% in each instance. 2% don't show up for their hearings or their trial. 2% are accused of a new offense. And the jail population is down more than 20%, and as I said, we're trying to drive it down further. So we have some real challenges, not just in Cook County, but in our country. Drug laws, in particular, are driving our jail population. And we're treating addiction and substance abuse in this country as a criminal issue rather than a public health issue, which I think is the appropriate approach. Christie said I could talk for a while, but maybe I should quit now and give everybody else a chance.
And I think that's a perfect segue because obviously, as Toni just said, one of the contributors are the laws on the books and how they're being enforced with regard to drugs. Now, it happens that Cook County actually made the most marijuana possession arrests of any county in the nation and had the worst racial disparity rates. In spite of the fact that here, as has been proven elsewhere, if you looked at 100 young white kids and 100 young kids of color, the rate of use of marijuana would be roughly the same, and it's roughly around 15 or 16%. And while simple possession charges are not likely to wind you up in jail, it starts you down a path that can have devastating consequences in terms of life outcomes. So we want to talk about what is it that is happening in other areas that are encouraging signs, knowing that we now are going to have legalized medical marijuana in this state, that there's a lot of interest in what's happening in Colorado and Washington. There are a number of ballot initiatives for full legalization of marijuana. And I think, Ethan, you could help us off a lot here if you could talk about the fact that given that our state marijuana arrest rate is actually much worse than the nation's, what is going on that you think is driving the bad behavior here, but equally importantly, what can we learn and perhaps follow in the footsteps of positive experiences that are happening in other states and even other countries?
Okay, thanks, Christie. I mean, I should just reveal my basic view at the beginning, which is that I regard the policy known as the war on drugs and the heavy reliance on the criminal justice system to deal with certain types of drugs and certain types of drug users and sellers as a monumental disaster for the country and the world. And a monumental public health disaster, monumental criminal justice disaster, a monumental fiscal disaster, and a monumental human rights disaster. And the way it's played out in terms of racial terms in this country and many others is absolutely despicable. I think the day will come, I hope the day will come, I'm fighting for the day will come, when another generation will look back on what we're doing now and have done for the last generation, the way people today look back about Jim Crow, the way they look back about the internment of Japanese in World War II, and see there's a moral outrage where people's grandparents and great-grandparents got swept up in an absolutely despicable policy that was not becoming to this nation. So that's where I'm coming from.
I've been working on getting Ethan to speak his mind.
Yes, that's
a good beginning.
That said, I should say also that I come from a background of scholarship. I used to be a professor before I got into advocacy like this. And what I'm curious about and what I study is the evidence from around the country and around the world about what's actually worked. What's worked in reducing crime, what's worked in reducing addiction, disease, death, all the bad things associated with drugs and drug policies, right? There's the farther reaches of this stuff when evidence can't take us and we have to rely on our sense of values. But here's what I can tell you on a bunch of fronts. On the issue of marijuana, and I'm speaking both as a New Yorker and as an American, Chicago and Illinois, and actually not just marijuana, you guys are so backward. You have to be embarrassed about this. And I realize that you have a lot of other priorities and a lot of other crises, but you take the marijuana issue, you're finally rolling out medical marijuana. I think you're the 23rd in the country to do it, and it's taken forever to do it. You had a marijuana decriminalization bill that got through both houses, but I think died on the governor's desk. Meanwhile, other states are taxing it, regulating it. The sky has not fallen. Tax revenues are coming in. I understand that Chicago and Illinois don't have any budget problems here. You're not eager to get a few $100 million a year from the marijuana taxation. You'd rather spend a few tens of millions arresting young black people for marijuana. But when other states are doing it, is there just an assumption here? It's a question that, no, we don't lead here. We follow after most of the rest of the country has done it. Put us mostly with the states in the South. That's how you should think about Chicago and Illinois. We'll wait for everybody else to do the evidence-based stuff, and then we'll do it here. Then I'll take the second issue. You take the issue of heroin. You have, what, double or triple the rates of heroin use among people getting arrested here? Meanwhile, you led the nation in cutting drug treatment funding over the last 5 or 10 years, right? You have an overdose issue that's near the top in this country, right? You're famous for heroin. You've had Mexican gangsters bringing it up here for 65 or 70 years before heroin was even cool, right? And what are you doing? What are you doing? We know, for example, that things like methadone maintenance and buprenorphine, the other maintenance thing, that they work. That if you look at what the World Health Organization, National Academy of Science, Institute of Medicine, National Institute of Health, if you look at what they all say, they say, if you're addicted to street heroin, the best thing for you is to get onto methadone or buprenorphine in a good program, not a stupidly run program. The amount of prejudice and stigma, methadone, that's just substituting one addiction for another. Well, quite frankly, if you can switch from cigarettes to vaping, nicotine, you're still addicted to the nicotine, but you've cut the risk by about 90%. If you can switch from street heroin to methadone or buprenorphine, you've cut the risk by about 90%, right? Medicaid law just changed. I think that was one of the few bills that got through over the governor's veto here. So Medicaid will start paying for this stuff. You got to roll it out. Around the world, many countries allow people who are in jail or prison to get methadone maintenance, and then when they come out, they transition to a program. Keeps crime down, keeps overdose down. It helps get people's drug problems out of their lives. You're not doing it. We got a big problem in New York. It's coming out some other places. Ain't happening here. Why? No good reason, just backward thinking. Now, when I look, one of the role models for here, I don't take this as a New Yorker diss in Chicago. I'm just looking as a head, kind of looking at this stuff internationally, right? But I'll tell you, what inspired me, beginning in the late 80s and 90s, was what the Europeans were doing. And I'm just going to finish by talking about a few key things there. And they're going to push you to your limits, but I got to tell you, if you don't start thinking outside the box, you ain't going to get outside the box in fixing this problem, right? First of all, Portugal. Portugal, about 15 years ago, changed their national law, and they basically said, we're not going to put anybody in jail for simple possession of any drug. Nobody goes to jail for drug possession. We're going to figure out what's their issue. If they're just a casual user, we're going to tell them, get out of here and don't get caught. If they have a problem, we're going to figure out, is it a mental illness problem? Is it an employment problem? Is it a reading problem? Is it an addiction problem? We're going to give them, and we're not going to drug test them. And we're not going to threaten to throw them back in jail because they can't stop their addiction, right? We're just going to, and their basic view is, if you're really a bad guy, we'll catch you for something else and we'll lock you up for something else. But we're not going to waste vast resources, as Chicago and the state of Illinois does, putting people behind bars. The evidence came out, British Journal of Criminology, all the bad things, drug use, drug addiction, overdose, HIV, arrest, criminality, all basically down or stable, right? And they sustained this policy even through a budget deficit issue that was worse than you guys are dealing with right here. If any of you read about Portugal's economic situation. And then finally, I'm just going to push you on this one. We know, based upon all the evidence, that when people are addicted to heroin, for some people they can get drug-free, they can quit, they can go cold turkey, and that'll work. For a lot of people, their bodies change, their physiochemistries change, they got to get into methadone. For many people, methadone or buprenorphine is not just a way to get off heroin. It becomes a lifelong or multi-decade commitment in the same way that a diabetic has to take that insulin every day, right? Or the same way I just started taking a statin and may start taking it for the rest of my life. It's not about getting off, and there's nothing immoral about staying on it, and it doesn't make you high if you're doing it right. But they did something interesting in Switzerland 20 years ago. They looked at people where nothing was working. Jail, prison, drug-free programs, even methadone or buprenorphine. And you know what they said? You love heroin so much, but you're tired of that life on the streets? Okay, we're going to set up a clinic. And in this clinic, it's going to be a high-end drug treatment clinic with counseling and other services, but we're going to allow you to take pharmaceutical heroin. High quality from a pharmaceutical company, heroin, right? You can't take it home, got to take it there, but you can come to 3 times a day, you'll get counseling and such, and you can keep taking it if you want, right? First people say, how can you do that, giving the junkies the junk they want? But the science was backing it up, and they started doing it. You know what happened? People started stabilizing their lives. They stopped getting arrested. They started reducing their other illicit drug use. Arrests went down, crime went down, overdoses went down, HIV and Hep C risk behavior went down. All the good, the leading champions of this program became big city police chiefs, saying it's cutting crime, it's cutting acquisitive crime, cutting drug markets, and giving a nod to public health. It was the right thing to do. And you know what else happened? Roughly 20 to 40% of the people in the program finally decided to get off heroin for the first time. Some of them said, let me make that methadone maintenance work because, you know, I can take it home, it'll work better that way. Others quit. They actually became, you say, how can that be? Dream come true? Free heroin? And you know what? It was the first time, instead of people addicted to heroin realizing it wasn't the heroin they were addicted to, it was the chase, it was pursuit, it was the lifestyle. And once that was removed, once they could get their dream drug, heroin, it was the first time they looked in a mirror and said, what the hell am I doing? Now, the results have been published out of Switzerland. Then they did it in Germany, the Netherlands, Denmark, the UK. Results now published in the New England Journal of Medicine, dozens and dozens of scientific journals, and all positive. Crime down, arrest down, stabilization of life up, HIV, Hep C down, addiction down, all positive things. Is anybody talking about it in America? More or less, no. Is the evidence overwhelmingly in favor? Yes. If I asked you how many of you 30 years ago or old enough supported needle exchange programs to reduce AIDS, most of you would say, I don't know. If I asked you how many you support now, most of you would say, of course, it's conventional. This is an issue where the evidence is in and we're not talking about it. If it can't happen, if it can't start happening, then we're not serious about getting outside the box.
Okay, Ethan, thanks. I want to take that very good point. I want to take Ethan's framing about broadening the conversation not just beyond a discussion of the criminal justice system to the issues of public health and treatment, but even more broadly to the issues of behavior and choices, and what is the framework that we can create as a civic society that will encourage people to make the right choices. And the work that Jens does is really focused on data-driven, what do we know that can break that traditional either-or choice between the liberal option of social programs to help and the conservative option of kind of more punitive laws to disincent to those kinds of actions that we can test and roll out that we know can work. So I think, Jens, it would be very helpful for the audience if you could talk about the type of work that you and your colleagues are doing, that you are encouraged about the ability to impact the decisions that young people make that can really impact this bigger crisis that we're discussing.
Great, thanks, Christie. Let me start off by thanking the Economic Club of Chicago for holding an event on this. I think that the city of Chicago is really wrestling right now, you can see this in the newspapers every day, with two very closely related problems that we usually think of as being in tension with each other. On the one hand, if you drive the 26th in California, you will see, depending on the year, 8,000 to 10,000 people in the jail, which nobody in this room can possibly think is a good outcome. And the more time you spend in the jail walking around seeing how people live, the less acceptable you will find that. On the other hand, if we were all to get into our cars tonight and drive just a few miles south or west into a neighborhood like Garfield Park, like Lawndale, like Englewood, like Auburn Gresham on a Friday night, you will see levels of violence that you would have to go to someplace like San Salvador or the favelas of Rio to see the equivalent of. We have homicide rates in some of our neighborhoods of the sort that you only see in developing countries in Central and South America. And I think if you look not just in Cook County, but if you look across the United States over the long arc of history, what you see is a policy debate that goes back and forth between how we want to trade off incarceration against the crime problem, as if those were the two inevitable choices that we had. And I think one thing that we want to be very careful about during the current conversation is that we do not fall into that exact same trap of thinking that those are the only two options, because one day crime will rise again. And we do not want to be in a position where any changes to the criminal justice system now will be rolled back by people believing that the only way to control crime is incarceration. And so I think the door number C that has the potential to get us out of this trap is really, in part, to think a lot more about prevention in the first place. And I think that's very complementary to some of the ways that Ethan would think about the drug problem as well. And if you're on the right of center in the United States right now, the way that you would think of prevention is deterrence from the criminal justice system. What you would do is you would imagine someone in a movie theater whose girlfriend or wife has been insulted. They're considering whether to escalate the confrontation. And if you're right of center, you would say the way that I will prevent that from turning into an assault or a homicide is to threaten that person with 5 years in prison if they escalate. And if 5 years in prison doesn't work as a threat, I'll turn the dial to 10 years or 15 years or 20 years. And if you're left of center, the way you think about preventing that from escalating into an assault or a homicide this is something that we did a lot in the 60s and 70s in the United States, is giving people money and jobs and things like that to give them more of a stake in society. And unfortunately, we did not have a great track record through that sort of prevention programming in the 60s and 70s. And what is kind of interesting about both the left of center and the right of center approaches, which I think is not intuitive at all, is that they really hinge on a shared theory of change about human behavior, which is that the guy in the movie theater whose girlfriend has just been insulted is thinking about the long-term consequences about what he's going to do next in the next 5 seconds of his life. And we know, you can see this when you can look in the behavioral economics literature, but you can also read through all of the homicide case reports in the basement of the Chicago Police Department, and you will see that a huge share of the most serious violence in Chicago is driven by people who clearly are just not thinking at all. And that has led us at the Crime Lab to do a variety of research projects that are around just trying to get people to do something as simple as slow down in very high-stakes situations and think about what they're doing before they act, with very, very encouraging results. And I think one kind of very important lesson from that is, we found that, for instance, enrolling people in just 1 year of programming in the Youth Guidance Becoming a Man program can reduce arrests for violent crimes by fully 50%, and increase high school graduation rates for the kids who are affected. That gets us out of this box of thinking that we have to choose between detention commitments and crime. We are keeping kids out of the system, we are keeping people in those communities safe, and we are improving people's long-term life outcomes. And I think the other kind of larger lesson from this as well, and I think this also echoes a larger point that Ethan was making too, is the incredible importance in this area of being much more attentive to what the data and the science are telling us in a very pragmatic way, rather than being so ideological on both sides about how to move forward here.
So let's build on that in terms of what are some things that we're starting to learn that could change the trajectory that we're on. And one of the areas of, I think, a lot of agreement is to find and then to support effective treatment programs and effective diversion programs. Toni, do you want to talk a little bit about things like HOPE and LEAP and some of those programs that you're either seeing explored here or you've seen other places, and how that might be helpful for those people that have gotten caught up in the system so that they don't wind up being permanently lost?
Well, one of the big problems we have in Cook County is the high rate of recidivism in our population. I think it's 52% of the people who are in the jail today will be back in jail sometime in the next 3 years. So we are working closely with Safer Foundation, which many of you may know about. It's an organization that serves those who have been detained and incarcerated, with organizations like TASK, which help us on substance abuse treatment. What we're trying to do is, for the first time, the county is providing grants to organizations in Cook County to help us with anti-violence and anti-recidivism initiatives. As I said, prior to my administration, that wasn't the way in which we chose to spend our county resources, but we're trying to go back to Jens' point, to look at some of the prevention strategies rather than simply investing all our money in the criminal court system and the jail. And by the way, it's a substantial investment. I think we spend close to $400 million a year just on forget the rest, the courts and all, just the jail and the Juvenile Temporary Detention Center, I think is $387 million, something like that. Frank is nodding his head, I think that's right. So almost $400 million a year just on the jail. And to go back to Jens' point, we're working hard to drive the jail population down, and we intend to drive it further down. So it's not going to bounce back up to 10,000, at least while I'm president of the county. But we've got some real challenges around trying to keep people out of jail and keep people from returning to the jail. And as I said, Safer, TASK. We're also working on an initiative with the police department in Chicago, a community triage center. On any given day, 20 to 30% of the people in the jail struggle with mental illness. Many of them have a dual diagnosis. They're substance abusers as well as struggling with mental illness. And we're trying to create this 24-hour center with our health and hospital system and the Chicago Police Department so that officers on the street who encounter somebody who's clearly in distress can take them to the triage center rather than putting them in the criminal justice system at all. And there they can get immediate treatment. They can be referred to supportive housing. I mean, we can deal with the struggles that they're facing right there that under other circumstances might bring them into the criminal justice system in the triage center. And we hope that that'll be opening in the spring. And if we can make it work and show progress in the Roseland community where this will be located, we hope to have them in other parts of the city. So we're looking at strategies to keep people out of the criminal justice system in the first place, like the triage center, and to support them once they come out of the criminal justice system with organizations like Safer and TASK. And we're funding for the first time restorative justice initiatives to try to help the community organizations that are working with offenders and the community to try to, I think they call them peace circles and other activities, to try to address those who transgress within the community rather than sending them into the criminal justice system. So we're pursuing a variety of the things that have been tried around the country here in Cook County, and we're hopefully over the next several years we'll have a better sense of what works here and what doesn't, and have more resources as we drive the jail population down to put into those kind of programs and activities.
So clearly there's a continuum here of places that the civic society and the political body can intercede and intercept. There's the support for research into and then programs that could actually increase the rate of good behavior so that someone hasn't broken a law in the first place, all the way to getting rid of mandatory minimums and reducing sentences and eliminating check the box and all those things that would help relieve the stigma and the price paid for those who wind up in the system. So along that path is the chunk that's about, are there too many things that are characterized as crimes that shouldn't be, that is driving this increase of incarceration and all the costs associated with that? And there is indeed a bipartisan supported bill, including co-sponsorship by Senator Durbin, called the Smarter Sentencing Bill, that is trying to address that sentencing piece. But I want to, Ethan, go back to your quiet critique of Chicago and Illinois and ask you...
Better him than me.
My pleasure.
To help the audience, because one of the things I want to come out of today with is a sense of what can all of us do that would not only make a bad situation better, but why shouldn't we put a stake in the ground and say that Chicago and Illinois will be a leader in smart public health, public safety policies that are empirically based. So you mentioned, as everybody knows, we've taken these baby steps with the medical marijuana. So people in this room are thinking about and trying to understand, how does that compare with decriminalization? Mm-hmm. How does that compare with setting up a for-profit operation for drugs? You obviously are looking at this in other places. If you were on a commission that was making recommendations to the legislature and to the civic leaders, what would you say to them are the best practices and things not to do in terms of moving the state forward so we're not such a laggard?
Yeah, well, I think the general answer is don't keep doing most of what you've been doing. And so let me just give a few examples. If you look at the evidence from other states, as I mentioned, the 4 states that have legalized marijuana now are regulating it. Colorado, Oregon, Washington, and Alaska have seen significant drops in marijuana arrests. But even Washington, D.C., which did not legalize, but they essentially decriminalized, but stopped short at the point of setting up retail outlets, right? They had a 95% plus drop in marijuana arrests in 2015 from the year before. That's significant. And that's a significant fiscal savings, and to my knowledge, with no uptick in crime. So that's the sort of thing that could be done, as opposed to, I think, you arrested.
And what about, Ethan, what do we know, because it's one of the things that people express concerns about, what do we know about what's happened to usage? Has that skyrocketed?
No, we don't see any skyrocket. The numbers are kind of hard and recent, and also people are more likely to say they use marijuana once it's legal than when it was illegal, so some of the numbers are a little suspect. But by and large, you're not seeing any real increases. People say, what about the kids? But then you have to ask the question, who has the best access to marijuana in Chicago today? Kids. Who had the best access when we were kids? Kids. Who's going to have the best access in the future? So the notion that, in fact, many people, when I know people my age who say, I don't know where to get marijuana, and the answer is typically, have you asked your kids? Right? So the fact is that the notion that we need to keep marijuana illegal to make marijuana less available to the kids are looking at their parents and like, what are you smoking? That notion of child protection doesn't, but Christie, just quickly on other issues apart from the marijuana one, I'll just give you a few reasonable examples of what's happening around the country. In New Jersey last year, or in 2014, we took on the private bail bond industry, challenging the notion that anybody should be kept in jail simply because they can't pay a few $100 or $1,000, whatever it is. And there's essentially the modern day version of debtor prison. And we beat them. We beat them. And the whole criteria by which people are detained or kept in jail now is changing. There's another organization now filing suits in southern states, southern cities, to just challenge the basic constitutionality of the notion that you can keep poor people in jail, that we will have a class-based incarceration system built into our law, and obviously with a huge racial component to it. That sort of stuff about uprooting the way bail's handled here would be a huge step forward. Another example, pioneered out of Seattle, King County, then rolled out in Santa Fe, now in Albany, other places getting behind it. Obama administration just decided they want to get behind it. It's something called LEAD, Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion, LEAD. And what it does, it involves the cops, when they pick up somebody for a petty crime or drug possession or whatever, not even booking them, but taking them directly to a social service program. So it's the not just pre-trial diversion, right? It's the pre-booking diversion. The initial results from an Arnold Foundation evaluation show it appears to be working, right? That's the sort of thing, I don't know that people in Chicago are talking about it, right? And lastly, I mentioned the Portugal example, but the simple decriminalization, right, of all drug possession. We have 1.5 million drug arrests in America, 1.4 million, something like that. The vast majority are simple possession. If we just stopped putting people in jail for that sort of stuff, stopped arresting them for that sort of stuff, and if they're on parole or probation, because we have 3 times as many people, 2.5 times as many people on parole or probation as we do behind bars, if we stop violating them for simple drug use, you want to call addiction a disease? Then how do you justify locking somebody up for manifesting the symptoms of their disease, i.e. relapse? So these are the steps of things that others are doing that could be done here safely with fiscal benefits, public safety benefits, and public health benefits.
So let's talk about
just a second, Christie,
sure.
to speak to Ethan's point, Christie. The way in which we've driven the jail population down is to focus on bond court. And bond court is the portal of entry into the criminal justice system. In 2010, 2011, when I came into office, only about 30% of the people who came before a bond court judge got release on their own recognizance or electronic monitoring. And as the jail population has dropped, it's been a reflection of the fact that now 70% of the people who come into bond court are released on their own recognizance or electronic monitoring. So the way in which defendants are viewed in bond court, and the fact that judges now have an assessment tool, which the chief judge has promoted, which enables them to make a careful evaluation of the risk that each defendant might pose, has given us an opportunity, as I said, not to drive the jail population down to where we want it. It's now, as I said, close to 8,000 from 10,000. We wanted to get it closer to 6,000, but we're making progress on that point. And I agree. I mean, we have a criminal justice system which penalizes poverty, and the people in our jail are not the people accused of the most serious crimes. They're just the poorest people.
So Toni, just to follow up, and then Jens, I do definitely want to turn to you. So if there's a contention that actually our prisons are filled predominantly with violent offenders, and in fact most of the people who are in prison nationally are not there for drug offenses. How do you want the audience to think about that when they think about the issues of public safety and incarceration?
Well, first of all, I'm not talking about prisons. I'm talking about the jail, where people are detained pre-trial. They're pre-trial detainees. And of our pre-trial detainee population, again, about 7% of the people in the jail are serving a sentence. I think if you talk to people on the street, they would think everybody in jail is convicted of something wrong. It's a very small percentage. So 93% are awaiting trial. Of that 93%, 70% are awaiting trial for non-violent offenses. As I said, things like drug abuse, drug use, possession with intent to distribute, prostitution, shoplifting, not paying your child support. I mean, you know, all kinds of stuff that if you really think about it, are these people really a danger to the society, and why are we keeping them in jail prior to their trial? I'll say it again, the jail's at the intersection of racism and poverty. Now, who actually goes to prison? I can't tell you what proportion of the people in our jail who are accused of violent or nonviolent crimes go to prison, but I know we have a large population in our prisons in this country of people who are there for drug-related offenses. And in my view, that's dumb and profoundly expensive and destructive, not only to the individuals who are there struggling with substance abuse, but also to the communities out of which they come, who are deprived mostly of the fathers and brothers and potential heads of households who, instead of having their substance abuse issues being dealt with in a public health context, are in jail or prison.
Jens, I know you wanted to add something, but when you go ahead and make your comments, could you also share a little bit about this jail or bail algorithm work that you've done?
Yeah, sure. I wanted to build on this idea of bond court, which really is just a huge challenge for the city of Chicago, Cook County, and really every city across the country is wrestling with this. The judges are faced, if you look at I'm not a lawyer, but whenever I try and read the statutes around what judges are supposed to do in bond court, it has language that is telling the judge, as I understand it, that they are making these decisions about pretrial detention or whether you go home awaiting adjudication of your case based partly on the person's risk of either flight or their risk to public safety. And that requires the judge to basically make a prediction about this person's behavior in the future. And if you go to 26th in California and you watch bond court in action, the judges do not have very much time at all to do this. And I think this movement towards
Anybody who watches The Good Wife remembers all those scenes when
That's
she
right.
was in bond court.
And so I think that there's a positive movement in the United States now to make better use of data and risk tools, not to make the decision, but to have a better informed decision. I think one of the challenges that we have with the risk tool industrial complex is that a lot of the technology is like Ford Pinto technology from the 1970s. And this problem that the judges are facing in trying to predict someone's behavior in the future from looking at their criminal record, that is from looking at their past behavior, that is something that the people in Silicon Valley have completely nailed. Every time you go to Facebook or Google or Netflix or on, there is a machine in the background that is predicting your behavior based on your past behavior. And we've been doing some work at the Crime Lab trying to take those technologies and predict people's risk of flight or public safety in the future. And we find that using that sort of Google-type technology instead of Ford Pinto technology, you can simultaneously reduce crime, reduce the size of the jail population. I think this last thing is equally important, and also reduce disparities in the criminal justice system. If you are making algorithmic informed decisions at bond court in Cook County, you would have less crime, a smaller jail, and the fraction of people in the jail who are African American would go down, all at the same time. Like that feels like just a win completely across the board.
But I don't think that addresses another critical issue, which is who comes into the criminal justice system in the first place. Because black and brown communities get over-policed and people get arrested for stuff that they don't get arrested for in white communities. So even if we get them into bond court and we have your technology to help us, it still goes back to the question of who's brought into the criminal justice system in the first place.
All right, so let's talk about the actors as opposed to the acts or the laws. So let's talk a little bit about how much of a role and responsibility is there at the level of the police. We're looking for a new superintendent of police here. How much is at the level of the district attorney when we know that fewer than 5% of criminal cases go to trial? How much rests with judges, and is the fact that in a system where judges are elected, we know there have been cases where ads have been run criticizing judges for not being tough on crime, and what is the impact there? I'd like thoughts that any of you have about how you would parse responsibility, not so much from the point of view of finger pointing, but from the point of view of this is what we should look to these institutions and their leaders to do to help move us forward.
Why is it that 80% of the people in my jail are from Chicago and Chicago's only half the population? What are the police in Chicago doing? I mean, I don't think that people in Chicago are more inclined to be criminals than people in suburban Cook County. Why is that? And I would argue that the way in which the police in this city view black and brown neighborhoods leads my jail to be overwhelmed with black and brown people. And that's something that has to be addressed by the mayor and the superintendent of police. They have to change the culture in the police department. And that's a critical issue as far as I'm concerned. I also think, so Kim Fox is here. Stand up, Kim Fox. You know, how prosecutors deal with with folks who come into the criminal justice system is really critical. If you know that the case that you have isn't going to hold up, why do you wait until the first hearing to let the charges be dismissed or have the judge decide they're going to be dismissed? What's the relationship between the prosecutor and the police? Does the state's attorney feel that he or she has to do go forward with whatever case the police bring to them? That's not, I mean, you have to exercise independent judgment, and we clearly haven't seen that in the last 7 years. I mean, the state's attorney is so intimately connected with the police that we don't have justice in police cases. And if you've read the stories about all the investigations of the police shootings, and Jason Van Dyke is the only one in the last umpteen years who gets charged in any of these cases. And black and brown people get shot and executed by the police all the time in this city.
Jens, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to add, I think there's obviously a huge amount of concern in the city of Chicago right now around discrimination in the criminal justice system, and a lot of activity to try and address that in a variety of ways. And I think everyone in the city is hoping that the task force, the DOJ involvement, all of the other changes in Chicago now will drive us to a place where everyone in Chicago can be confident that we have a criminal justice system that is discrimination-free. I think it is also important to recognize that there is a huge social challenge in the background that is on top of that. If you go to the south and west sides of the city of Chicago, you will see neighborhoods with poverty rates and levels of disadvantage that places like New York, Los Angeles, many, many American cities have nothing like that. To see, the neighborhoods like Lawndale and Englewood and Garfield Park, they have levels of economic disadvantage that you have to go to places like Detroit, St. Louis, Baltimore, and on to see. And every city like that has such distressed, segregated, socially isolated communities are racked by huge levels of violence. And I think this is not an argument against doing all of these other incredibly important things around the criminal justice system, but also just to remind us that once that is accomplished, that is the start of this whole other thing that we have to fix. Because absent that, we have this whole other problem that will still be in place.
And another way to put that, which could be another panel, is if indeed we make systemic changes that free up dollars that otherwise are being spent wastefully, how should we be investing those dollars in our communities and in programs that lead to the best possible Chicago for all of its citizens? We're going to be wrapping up, so I'm going to ask each of the panelists 2 quick last questions, because I do want to not just stimulate your awareness of these issues, but to think about what we can do following on this. And that is, what is the one thing that you think we here should do that we're not doing today, and what is the one thing we should stop doing that we are doing today? Jens?
Let me address something very different from what we've talked about before, because I think one of the other big challenges that we have in the background in the city of Chicago and almost every city in the United States is a terrible resource problem in addressing the sort of social challenges that we just talked about. And there's something very, very funny and unfortunate in the way that we in the United States pay for a lot of the core services that are designed to help people in our most disadvantaged neighborhoods. So think about how we pay for all of the things that help prevent crime. Public schools, social service programs, police, all of those things are paid for by city and counties in the United States. Think about what happens when economic conditions decline across the country. That's when crime goes up. That's when you would most want as a city to be able to increase your spending on all of these things that help control the crime and keep people out of the criminal justice system in the first place. But because cities and counties can't run budget deficits, we're in this perverse situation that when we most want to try and control crime in the disadvantaged neighborhoods, cities have to start rolling back their spending on all of these social services and other things that help these neighborhoods. Because we've made a decision in the US that the federal government basically does almost next to nothing in helping cities with education, police, all these other sorts of things. And I think that over the long term, we should be having a conversation including in cities where some people in this room, for instance, might even know the president, about whether we can get the federal government more involved in helping cities and this is the economic club, so I'll use an economic term, to help cities do a better job of counter-cyclical spending on all of these things that can help disadvantaged people in the economic conditions when you most want to be able to help them.
Toni?
Well, first of all, I think decisions by prosecutors make a tremendous difference in the justice and criminal justice system. And I've made it quite clear that I believe we need a change in prosecutors in Cook County, and I encourage you all to support Kim Foxx. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, that's not facetious, I'm quite serious about this. The second thing is that we can't think that we're going to address the violence problems in this nation simply with policing strategies, even if we improve our policing strategies. To go back to Jens' point, you know, if you look at the communities where there's most violence, they have the highest poverty levels, the lowest levels of educational attainment, the poorest quality public schools, they're food deserts. I mean, every negative attribute of a community that you can think of applies to them. So we're not, even if we do a better job of policing, going to address the violence simply with police. We have to figure out what our economic development strategy is. And to go back to Jens' point, I'm sure the President of the United States would like to have an urban policy that helps us address some of these challenges. It would get nowhere in Congress. So to suggest that the national government ought to do it is a good thing, because it's not possible. So we're going to have to figure out what we're going to do here ourselves with our own resources. And that's a challenge, I think, that the Economic Club ought to address. What are we going to do here in Chicago, in Cook County, with our own resources to address the challenges that we see in front of us, knowing that the federal government isn't going to help us? It doesn't have the willingness, it doesn't have the courage, whatever, to do it. So it's on us. What should we stop doing? We should stop mandatory sentencing. We should stop penalty enhancements for things. We're increasing the number of things that you can put people into the criminal justice system for, and increasing the penalties. And all that's done is destroy people in communities. It's disgraceful. We ought to be ashamed.
Ethan?
Yeah, I can combine actually my answer to this question with the previous one, Christie, about the key actors. Because, look, on some level, what we see going on with policing in Chicago, especially right now and other places, it's part of a police culture that's become profoundly flawed, right? And now there's a crisis, and the Justice Department is coming in, and something may change because the crisis has emerged. Prosecutors are a major problem. The assumption that they can essentially, you almost can't indict a prosecutor for doing anything, including lying, withholding evidence, or anything.
You just defeat them in elections, that's what
hopefully. But you see the use of the grand jury, but all that. But the answer ultimately comes down in terms of should and shouldn't and actors. I actually think that the principal problem and the principal potential for moving in the right direction lies in this room and in what this room represents. Because ultimately, it's the leadership of civil society. It's the power brokers, the most respected people, the leaders in business, right? In all walks of life, who need to insist on change. And I think that boils down to two things. One, and this is what should not happen, is not to persist with the complacency and the conventionalism that allowed the system to become as fundamentally problematic as it is, to insist that that can't happen anymore. What needs to happen is an element of civic leadership coming together in a truly bold way, committed to two things. One is to a new and bold vision about how to deal with this stuff, not being held back by what's acceptable, political, conventional, but by a bold vision of reform. And the second one has to be a commitment to looking at the best evidence and best practices, not just around America, but around the world. And the combination of looking at best practices around the world with a vision for changing the way you deal with drugs, and believe me, it'll spill over in all sorts of ways on crime, that's what needs to happen. If that commission could happen in Chicago, and it would not land up being bogged down by conventionalism, and that's not political and all that, then something might really happen, and Chicago might assume a place of leadership in dealing with this.
So I hope you can tell how passionate and how committed each of our panelists are to these issues. My one hope is that you will not let this subject end or this discussion end today, but that you will carry it forward in all of your work. Please join me in thanking our panelists.
Thanks.